another episode of Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures as the Olympics get closer and closer and closer. And we're here, of course, for Aussie Home Loans, who deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital. They do Zoom as well, and their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment. They can also build a property portfolio, as well as refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. And they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. Today is a man who's one of only two Australian weightlifters who represented Australia at the Olympic Games. Damien Brown was one of them. This other gentleman was there in 1976 at Montreal, in 1980 at Moscow, and there was a partial boycott, but his sport and himself, they were lucky enough to be there. We'll certainly talk about that. And then he finished with a silver medal in Australia's best ever Olympic Games performance so far, when he won a silver medal and Dean Lucan won a gold medal. We're talking, of course, of the man who won a silver medal in the light heavyweight division and then was heavily involved in the sport as an administrator, so he's given so much to the sport he loves, Robert Kabbas. Robert, thanks so much for joining us on the program. Great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Why weightlifting, and why do you love it so much?
It's a good question. So many weightlifters come into the sport, particularly as it's not a big sport, through different avenues in Australia. For me, it was a little bit more straightforward because it was more or less the family sport. My father and three uncles all did weightlifting in Egypt, where I was born, and it just seems to be a natural progression for me to take up the sport. I was always surrounded by either weightlifting magazines or weightlifters themselves, going to weightlifting competitions. And in Alexandria, where I was born, we had two Olympic gold medalists living there who my father knew quite well. And, you know, I guess their figure loomed large in my childhood as Olympic gold medalists. So it was a fairly natural progression, as I said, for me to try the sport at least. And once I did try it, I fell in love with it. So I kept going.
Was that one of the big sports in Egypt, if not the biggest sport at the time?
It was one of the biggest sports, one of the more popular sports, and Egypt is still quite strong in weightlifting these days. They had a bit of a hiatus, I suppose, from the 70s through the 80s a little bit, but they're quite strong at the moment in men's and women's weightlifting. Of course, there was no women's weightlifting when I was competing, but it's been a great addition to the sport. And yeah, they're quite strong in both men and women.
Well, it came in 2000 because I remember one of our commentators, it was my first Olympic Games, that were talking of the women's weightlifting. Graham Smokey Dawson, well, he lost his voice, and they asked me to do it at the last minute. So I was doing the women's, which I knew a little bit about weightlifting. So I did the women's weightlifting, but it was a great addition in 2000. And as you would say, Robert, being an administrator and being a great weightlifter for our country, it did take a long time. Why did it take so long for women's weightlifting to come in to the Olympic Games?
Well, it wasn't always a great fit for women, I guess. There were a lot of, I suppose, bias against the sport of women doing it. It's a tough sport, you know, can they lift the heavy weights? Pretty much the same arguments before they introduced the marathon for women and other events such as boxing and wrestling for women. It just took that little bit longer for weightlifting. And I'm saying it probably shouldn't have taken that long because the first weightlifting world championships were held in 1989 or something like that. So it took a while for them to break through. I think it was just a matter of setting a standard that was appropriate for an Olympic Games. So it's just a matter of waiting for the sport to be taken up globally. I think when it first started, it was dominated by the Chinese, who had already been doing women's weightlifting in their national games. So I think it was just a matter, as I said, a matter of getting it up to a certain standard and having it competitive at a global level rather than have one or two nations dominated.
I was lucky enough in 2018, Robert Kabbas is our guest on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Homelines, to be the media coordinator of the weightlifting team, one of three teams I looked after, but the weightlifting team was one that I did at the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast. And I thought the women were more popular. I mean, we had Debbie Atkinson in the super heavyweight, and we had Tia-Clair Toomey. I mean, I'll never forget that Friday night. The crowd was rocking and rolling watching Tia. She didn't miss a lift in either the clean and jerk or the snatch, and it was just a wonderful atmosphere. And I know Damon Kelly and a few of the other guys, they were great too with their theatrics, but you can't tell me that wasn't one of the highlights of the entire Commonwealth Games, was watching Tia-Clair Toomey and the other women lift. It just it took the roof off the stadium, I reckon.
Oh, absolutely. And her competition was just an ideal one to showcase women's weightlifting, because it was such a close competition with the Canadian
Yes.
with the Canadian weightlifter. So it was I actually competed against her father in Los Angeles, the Canadian, just as a side thing. But Tia-Clair, of course, was already well known through CrossFit that she dominates, and she's just I mean, whatever she does, she's obviously an absolute competitor. There's no stopping her, and she never fails to rise to the occasion. So yeah, ideal showcase for women's weightlifting. And if I had to, I suppose, make a judgment at the moment, women's weightlifting in Australia is probably at a higher level than the men's. So most of our higher ranking athletes and medal chances are coming from the women.
Why do you think that's the case, Robert? You think Tia-Clair's had a lot to do with that?
Possibly. I think when CrossFit first sort of hit the big time, if you like, a lot of weightlifters were saying, oh, well, we'll get a lot more competitors coming into the sport now through CrossFit, because weightlifting plays such a big part in CrossFit. But it didn't translate for the men so much. A lot of women crossed over from CrossFit with great success. Not so much for the men. I'm not sure why the reason that is, and without putting down or without making generalizing about men in CrossFit, I think it's just the general character, the type of competitor that you get in men's CrossFit is not the one that you normally associate with men in weightlifting, who have tended to be over the years just head down, ass up, no nonsense, almost introverted sort of athletes, which is complete opposite of what the CrossFit men are. And I think coming over from CrossFit, it's a bigger jump for the men to compete against the real weightlifters. So whereas the women seem to be a lot closer in the weights they handle at CrossFit. So it's not such a large jump for them to get into weightlifting and be competitive quicker than the men would be.
Robert Kabbas, silver medalist for Australia in the weightlifting at Adelaide 1984, is my guest on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Homelines, who can deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital, and they do Zoom as well. Now, as you said, you were born in Egypt. How old were you when you came out to Australia, and why did the family choose Australia?
Okay, well, I remember boarding the ship to come over on my 11th birthday. So I just turned 11, and we got onto the boat for the 2-week trip to come out here. And I think from my recollection is from talking to my father was that at the time they were looking at a better future for us, and they looked at both Australia and Canada, and the two consulates in Egypt at the time were actively trying to attract immigration, both Canada and Australia. And he had applied for both, and he decided that whoever answers first, that's where we'll go. And Australia responded first. So that's the story, yeah.
Well, it ended up being a great success for you. You came out here at the age of 11. obviously not really knowing the language, not knowing the country. How confronting was it for an 11-year-old boy to settle into a new country and then, I suppose, try and find a weightlifting club, considering, as you say, you'd started doing the sport because there was a background in it back home in Egypt?
Yeah, look, I guess it wasn't too bad. When we first came here, I spoke French, so I had knowledge of a language other than Arabic. And while French is not that close to English, it's sort of a Western language, Western tongue, if you like. And I found English a fairly easy language to pick up. So I was in year 6 in primary school, and for the first, I'm guessing maybe for the first 3 months, I sat next to a boy who was from Mauritius who spoke French. So he
Right.
was my interpreter, uh, especially during English classes. And actually, for English classes, there was myself, a young boy from what was then Yugoslavia, and a Hungarian. And the three of us would go into another smaller office, if you like. And there was a teacher there that helped us develop our English. And I recall by the end of the year that the three of us had joined in the general classes and could carry on with the language without too much trouble. As I said, uh, people say English is hard to pick up as far as the different words that are pronounced differently, GH and TH and whatever. But the grammar itself is fairly simple. You don't have to, for instance, in French and Arabic, everything has a gender. A desk is masculine. A magazine could be feminine, whatever. There's no such thing in English. Everything is the. You don't have to have all those different grammatical hurdles that you have to jump over. So I found it fairly easy, and I was lucky. The teacher that I had, I mean, looking back now, I'm guessing he probably was in his 50s, maybe early 60s, and he was an experienced teacher, a kind man, and really looked after us, the new boys at the school and the kids. I mean, at that age, you always find common interests, and you just play along. We were well accepted. I don't recall it as being a difficult or particularly traumatic time for us, my brother and I.
Which was fantastic. I mean, the other interesting thing too, I suppose, when you go to a new country, even if you go from one English speaking country to another, you pick up the language, you pick up the accent pretty quickly as a kid, don't you? Because you're hanging around with kids all the time and you just start copying them. It might be a little bit harder for your parents and for other adults that come out. They may never lose their native tongue, but for kids, they lose it pretty quickly, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky at the age of 11 to come up here and be able to pick up the language a lot quicker than I would have had I come out here, let's say 5 or 10 years later. Then it becomes much more problematic. Both of my parents already spoke English, obviously, before coming here. My mother had learnt it at school and kept up her knowledge of it, and my father was always interested in Western movies and so on. So his English was he actually spoke 5 languages, so he had no problem with language when we came here.
So, in regard to weightlifting, you've come out here, you've looked for a club, you found a club. When did you feel, Robert, gee, I'm pretty good at this, I could take this a fair way and maybe represent my adopted country? Was there a light bulb moment?
Look, I guess in a new country, you always look for something that is familiar to you. So I remember we'd been here maybe a little bit less than a year, and we attended Mumba by the Yarra, just as a family. And as we were walking, we recognized someone immediately, and we said, "This guy is a weightlifter." He had a weightlifting belt, a tracksuit on, and so on. So we followed him, and there was a weightlifting exhibition at an outdoor venue as part of Moomba, which ran for actually for quite a number of years. So we went there and we watched the weightlifting competition. As it turned out, the guy that we saw was Ray Rigby, who represented Australia at the 68 Olympic Games and won a gold medal at the 1970 Commonwealth Games for Australia as a super heavy. And from there, we sort of, okay, so we got to know a little bit about the local weightlifting community. And the following year, when I went to high school, there was another student there. Actually, just by a mere coincidence, Caulfield High School was where I attended, which is now Glen Eira College.
Yep.
But in those days, Caulfield High School had a strong weightlifting team. Very unusual for a school back in those days to have a weightlifting set and to have weightlifting encouraged there. And just by coincidence, I was near the lockers one day, sitting down and just doing a sketch of a weightlifter. I like to do some drawings and so on. And one of the other weightlifters, who was a year older than I was walking past, and he said to me, "Oh, what are you doing? That's a weightlifter." I said, "Yeah." And so then that got the conversation going. And he said, "Oh, look, I'm a member of the Hawthorn Weightlifting Club," which was and still is one of the strongest clubs in Australia. And he said, "Why don't you come down and there's a competition in a couple of weeks against Scotch College. So would you like to compete in that?" And that's how we got started. So that other athlete was a guy called Ivan Katz, who was the Australian junior champion at the time. And we both made the Commonwealth Games together. We both set up a weightlifting club together much later after we'd retired. So my involvement with that club was through him and the other weightlifters at Caulfield High School.
So 1976 comes around. Obviously, you'd started to move up through the ranks. Were you confident that you'd get selected in the Australian team for 1976?
I wasn't confident, but I was ambitious. Let's put it that way. The qualification process in 1976 was much more clear cut than it is these days to try and get into weightlifting at the Olympic Games for a number of reasons. The number of competitors has been capped for weightlifting since, I think, 2008, I think. So there a lot of different processes had to be involved. Whereas when I was looking at making the Olympic Games, the International Federation set a certain standard that had to be met. If you met that standard, you qualified to go. And if the Australian Olympic Committee or the Australian Olympic Federation in those days had budgeted for a certain number of weightlifters, then you got to go. So it's fairly straightforward. The only problem for me at the time was 12 months out from the Olympics in 76, the qualifying total was 10 kilos above the Australian record and 25 kilos above my personal best. So it was quite challenging. But, I got there eventually. My uncle was my coach, and he coached me throughout my whole career. And he set up the training, a great program for me, tailor-made for me to suit my strengths and weaknesses or challenges, if you like. And I made the qualifying total to go over there. So yeah, it was very satisfying. As I said, it was challenging, and when you have such a challenging total to achieve, it makes it that much more satisfying to be able to do it.
Was it always light heavyweight? I mean, that was where you won your silver medal, which we'll get to shortly. But there was a middle heavyweight event at the Commonwealth Games that you competed in. You had success there. Of course, you won a gold medal in the light heavyweight. But why light heavyweight?
Well, in Montreal in 1976, I was actually a middleweight.
Right.
I'd always struggled throughout my career. I'd struggled to put on weight. So I was always force feeding and so on. But Montreal was, apart from one other competition where I'd lost weight through not being well, but Montreal was my last event as a middleweight. which was 75 kilograms was the maximum you could weigh, because I'd started at 21 years of age. I'd started to struggle to come down to that 75 kilogram limit. So once I came back to Australia, we decided, well, weightlifting is all about getting bigger and stronger. There's no point holding back the natural progression of my weight. And we just decided to eat up and move into the next weight category, which was the light heavyweight category. So I guess for my height and physique, it was ideal for me to compete in that category. The only time that I did move up to middle heavyweight, which had the light heavyweight had a maximum weight of 82.5 kilograms.
Right.
Middle heavyweight was 90 kilograms. And the reason I moved up to that weight category wasn't because I had any trouble actually getting down to 82 kilograms, but through a number of injuries and other challenges in training, I hadn't improved for about, I guess my total hadn't improved for about 3 or 4 years. And the president of the Australian Weightlifting Federation at the time, a man called Les Martin, who was also president of the Commonwealth Games Association, approached me at training one day, and he said to me, "Look, Robert, people are saying that you're stagnating and you're not improving and you may not make the games in Brisbane in 1982. And he said, I'll make a suggestion for you and you can talk it over with your coach. But I think just to reignite your career and get you moving again, why don't you compete in the heavier category?" And his thinking was that I was having trouble making 82 kilograms. So his argument or his point of view was, and it'll save you having to, diet down to 82 kilograms. So he asked me, for instance, how much you're weighing at the moment. I said to him, well, Les, I'm actually weighing 80 at the moment. So I was already 2 kilograms under the weight limit. And he said to me, well, son, you better go and start eating. So, so the whole idea was I force-fed myself up into the next category. I was eating 6-7 meals a day. And I remember a couple of the guys that I coached will laugh at this because that was my recommendation to them. I had potatoes with everything.
Potatoes with everything.
All sorts of different potatoes with everything. My wife at the time would make a whole batch of biscuits that I'd sit down in front of the TV and just polish off all in the one time. It was just constant eating. I wasn't hungry for 12 months because I was just eating all the time. I never got to the stage where I was hungry, but it did the trick. I put on the weight, and with the hard training that went with it, it was good quality weight. It was muscle. And yeah, it got my career moving again. I broke the Australian and Commonwealth records in that weight category and went on to win in Brisbane in 82, which was great. I mean, there's nothing like competing in front of a home crowd. It's just a sensational feeling.
We're speaking to Robert Kabbas on Dashing Games Olympic Adventures, who went to 3 Olympic Games, 1976, 1980 and 1984, where he won a silver medal in LA. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans, where you can purchase a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation or cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, and also they have all sorts of loans, from equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. I'll get back to 76 in just a second because it was a challenging Olympic Games for Australia, Robert, being your first one. But I'm interested in the eating aspect because, as I said to you, I was part of the Commonwealth Games team, their media person in 2018, and I would sit at times in that massive hall and eat with them. I'd see Big Tom on telly who could eat anything that he wanted. The big Pakistani super heavy weightlifter, who was the biggest man I've ever seen, they would have 3 or 4 plates. And then I'd see the lightest member of the Australian team, one of the female lifters, who had to weigh her food. So when you went back to the middle or the light heavyweight division, how tough was it to change your eating habits?
Not that hard, really, because I never enjoyed force feeding. So I just went back to eating normally. So I was lucky. in that respect, in that I could just eat normally and my weight would just gradually come back down again. And the other part of it was that I'd injured myself at the World Championships in 1983 and had to back off my training. So my weight dropped off anyway. So it was, the decision was almost made for me. Look, you've already lost weight. Do I want to go through that whole process of force feeding again and try to qualify at 90 kilograms? It just looked at that stage a little bit more realistic to try and qualify for Los Angeles anyway at 82.5 kilograms, which was I guess my normal resting weight, if you like. So that's what we did, because once again, the qualifying totals for Los Angeles were above the Australian records again. So, each time we qualified, it was a challenge. Ironically, the only one where I qualified easily for was the Moscow Olympics, and that was one of my worst performances through injuries and whatever else. So, but certainly 76 and 84 were quite challenged to try and qualify.
Well, 1976 was your first Olympics. Australia struggled holistically, not winning a gold medal. What was the atmosphere like for a young man from Melbourne who'd gone across in his first Olympic Games and meeting a lot of athletes from different sports?
It was great because up until then, even though I'd competed and my teammates in Montreal, Steve White and Bob Edmond had also competed internationally, it was always just weightlifters. And we'd never been exposed to a multi-sport event, apart from one year we went to the New Zealand Games. But other than that, it was always just weightlifters. So as someone who's interested in most other sports, it was a fun time, but the challenge was not to be distracted by it. So the challenge was to remember that you're not there as a spectator, you were there as a competitor, as a participant. So it was a conscious effort that we made not to get carried away with the whole entertainment or fascination, I guess, of the event, and to try and focus on that. Yeah, we're there to do a job. But yeah, certainly very, very exciting, and to be part of the opening ceremony, and to see some of the other athletes in other sports who'd already obviously been exposed to world champions in weightlifting and made some friends from some of the other international teams, but to see other athletes from other sports was certainly an experience, and one that once you taste it once, you'd want to repeat again. Yeah.
How did you feel regarding your performance? I mean, it was your first one, as you say. You're obviously determined to go again. What did you think, considering it was your first Olympic Games?
I guess at 21, I was fairly raw, not that experienced at all. And coming back from there, I was a little bit disappointed with my performance there. Weightlifting is made up of two competition lifts. One is the snatch, the other one is the clean and jerk. Very basically, for people who don't follow weightlifting, the snatch is you elevate the weight over your head in one movement, whereas the clean and jerk, you can rest on your shoulders and then drive it overhead. So up until then, the snatch was probably my better lift of the two. And I didn't do that well at all in the snatch. I only got 1 out of the 3 attempts. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. Clean jerks, I went reasonably well, but to try and move up the rankings, I had to take an Australian record at the end, which I really wasn't ready for. So I was a little bit disappointed. But at 21, you don't focus on the disappointment. It just serves to sort of stoke that fire in your belly, if you like, and then you say, okay, now I just want to go and have another crack at this, And after that, of course, it was the 78 Commonwealth Games, which then became the target.
Were you aware holistically, Robert, that the team didn't win a gold medal, that it was a disappointing games overall for Australia, because generally they'd win gold medals, and that was one where they didn't. They had a men's hockey team were the favourites, got beaten in the final. Stephen Holland, I remember watching that as a 7-year-old at school at Mother of God Primary in East Ivanhoe.
Yeah.
And he got a bronze medal in the
Yes.
1500 metres. And I think John Samugi might have won a medal in the canoe sprint. But Australia didn't win much in 76. Did you, even though you were very young, did you get a feeling that the team had failed the country?
Not really. Look, to be honest with you, we went there as weightlifters, and we were just concerned with weightlifting. Certainly, we hoped that the whole team would do well, but for us, it was just how we were going to go, and we were a little bit centered, focused on that. And also, when you're part of a team, you're not there to be judgmental, because no one is going there to fail. Everyone is going there to try and do their best. And the Olympics are 4 years apart. You got to be right on that one day in 4 years. And not everybody's going to be at their peak. Someone's going to be up, someone's going to be down. So we didn't get that feeling of all of the team let everybody down or whatever. We saw that the swimmers were down a little bit, and I know some of the swimmers copped a bit of flack for supposedly being overweight, especially some of the young girls, which was a little bit tough on them. It was actually it was the first Olympic Games where the food hall was open 24 hours a day, and some of the swimmers were accused of going in there and eating all the time or whatever, which was a bit of a nonsense. But sometimes people are desperate for a story, and they'll beat something up.
Yes.
From I guess from a positive point of view, the way we looked at it was, maybe this is a good wake-up call for the authorities in Australia, because we lacked funding. In 76, I had to go out and sell pens to try and raise money for the Olympic team, which is not the ideal situation you want to be in if you think that you're an Olympic athlete and a professional athlete and so on. So we're out there fundraising, as I said, selling pens and so on, not the way you want to prepare for an Olympic Games. So from our point of view, certainly from our perspective, from the smaller sports, we roomed with the wrestlers, and we were probably pretty much of the same mind. Look, maybe this is what's needed for people to say, hang on, we've got to get behind our athletes and find some funding and so on to try and get them up to that level, because certainly the Australian public was disappointed and they're looking for better results. And we thought this may be an impetus, and it was, because that's what brought about the Australian Institute of Sport.
Well, that's right. Malcolm Fraser, I think one of his election promises in 77 was to build the Institute of Sport in Canberra. I think it was one of his big legacies, and Australia started to improve after that. As you mentioned, you won a gold medal in 1978. Did you feel at the Commonwealth Games, once you won that gold medal, that your weightlifting was going to the level that it needed to go? And come 1980, if you got the opportunity, it would be your second Olympic Games, you'd be better prepared?
Look, to be honest, when I first started weightlifting, I started just after my 14th birthday, or just before my 14th birthday, and it was somehow in my head that I figured that I would be at my physical peak at 25, which would have been the 1980 Olympic Games. I hadn't even thought about Los Angeles. My 14-year-old head was thinking gold medal in 78 for the Commonwealth Games, an Olympic medal in 1980, and stop. So I didn't look past 1980. But reality, I guess, and the weightlifting gods had something else in mind. So 78 was just a great year for me. Everything I touched just went overhead. Like the weights felt like nothing. And towards the end of the year, I jerked the world record in training. So I approached 79 in a great frame of mind. But at my second, and I won my first international, a World Cup event in Athens. So I won the gold medal there. But my next international event in Hungary, I dislocated my shoulder.
Right.
So So that set me back a fair bit and put all preparations for the 80 Olympics, you know, off track. So I had to go back and gather ourselves again. And while my shoulder was recovering, I probably overworked my legs. By the time my shoulder came good, my knees weren't that good. So I reached Moscow just barely getting there. And to be honest, I've said that to other people that if it had been a World Championships or even another Olympic Games, I may have considered pulling out of the team because of injuries and not being in shape. But I was also conscious of the fact that at the time, a number of people had been either forced out of the team or whatever because of the talk about the boycott. The government was actually paying athletes not to go rather than supporting them to go and perform well. So if you withdrew from the Olympic team, Malcolm Fraser's government was offering money to athletes and other competition, international competition. So the reason I didn't entertain withdrawing from the team is I didn't want it to be seen that I was supporting the boycott of the games. I was pretty strong in my mind that there shouldn't be a boycott. And so I was determined to go in whatever shape I was in.
It would have been a tough time, Robert, mentally for you, because not only with the injuries, as you say, you're also, and it's out of your control and out of all the athletes' control, you're worried about whether the team's actually going to go. I mean, you're trying to get fit thinking, well, at this stage we're still going, but most of the AOC are against it. As we know,
Yeah.
young John Coates and a few other young administrators did their very best to turn
Yeah.
a couple of the older guys around. And as we know, the AOC voted 4-3 in favour. And then, of course, the government got to work, as you say, and were able to talk some athletes and some teams like the hockey into not going. So it would have been hard to concentrate on being prepared for the Olympic Games and then also knowing that it may not happen anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. To be training and have that uncertainty hanging over your head. I think I may have said a few things which were published in the Herald at the time, which were not complimentary of the Olympic officials. And I remember one of the guys who was leading the athletes at the time rang me up and he said, "Look, Rob, I know you're upset and whatever, but it's not helpful because we've got some people in the Olympic Federation on side with us. So I just keep it under control a little bit." I said to him, "That's all. I'm not going to comment at all, either in the papers or in public after this." But I worked at the Age newspaper at the time in their advertising section. And I mean, they were great for me throughout my whole career, very supportive. But at the time, the Age building in Spencer Street in the city had about 1,100 people working there. And you could bet every day for those 3 or 4 months, at least 20 of those 1,000 people would be sharing their opinions with you as to whether you should go or whether you should stay and why are you going, why are you staying, and that was constant. This was every day, every single day. Someone out of the 1,100 people would share their opinion with you, some more forcefully than others, and you just had to, just nod and what are you going to do? You can't argue with 1,000 people. So it certainly was a distraction and not an ideal preparation for an Olympic Games.
You weren't approached regarding money at all from the government?
No, I don't think anyone was targeted personally. I think the offer was out there and the athletes knew about it, and probably sports were approached through their administration. So I guess, as you mentioned, the hockey team didn't go. So I imagine the approaches were made to their administration rather than the athletes directly.
Well, I know that.
I mean, I would doubt that if the team had a vote, that they would have voted to stay home.
Well, we've had Rick Charlesworth Yeah, yeah. We've had Rick Charlesworth, one of our greatest hockey players, on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, Robert, and he said that I think the chief of staff for Malcolm Fraser was the vice president of the Hockey Association, and he was approached, and the Australian men's hockey team were in their prime. They'd won everything in the 4 years in between, and they were one of the favourites, and it would have been the first time the women went as well. So, yeah, it was pretty tough for them, but no doubt tough for everyone. What was the atmosphere like? Because it wasn't a big team. As you say, there was a partial boycott. Those that were there, was there a feeling of we've got a lot to prove here? Let's prove the doubters wrong, especially the government back in Australia?
Look, again, pretty much the same as Montreal, or if anything, it was even more enforced, at least in my mind, and I think in most of the other guys' minds, is that we're there to do a job, whether we're there as part of a team that's going against the boycott or whatever else. We're there as participants. We're not here to watch or comment or to prove anything to anyone else. I think the whole idea is, if you're at the Olympic Games, you're focusing on your own performance, and you're not there to try and prove a point to anybody else, even your competitors. You try and shut them out of your mind, especially in a sport like weightlifting. So it's similar to golf in a way that you focus on your own performance. You're aware of what your opponents are doing, but they have no direct effect on how you perform. So you can focus totally on your own lifting, and then you see where that places you. Sure, the coaches or whatever can make a call here and there to try and jock you for positions. To you only have the 3 attempts, so you've got to choose them wisely, obviously. But then ultimately, it's up to you whether you can lift those weights or not.
I know you were disappointed with what happened in 80. You were injured, and there were a lot of other factors as well. But it might have been the best thing that happened to you, because you weren't finished yet, were you? You were determined to win a medal. You said it was part of your plan when you got into sport back in 1968. So after winning a gold medal in the Com Games in 82, you thought, I'm going to LA in 84. And what an Olympic Games it was for you, Robert Kabbas. It was fantastic, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, being at the right place at the right time, I guess, and also just even leading up to those games, like in Brisbane, I got there after a knee operation, and I'm pretty sure at the time I was the first Australian weightlifter to have a knee operation and come back to the same level or a higher level from it. Normally, it would be it used to be anyway, a career-ending injury. So, but again, luckily, I was looked after well by surgeon and physios and so on. So, as I said, I've been lucky through my career to have support from so many different quarters. So it was touch and go whether I would even compete at the 82 games, which eventually I did. And I think, again, putting on the weight helped. Having that extra muscle coming back from injury and so on. So after that, Los Angeles was the target. In between, there was the 1983 World Championships, which was held in the worst place it could possibly be held, which was Moscow. I competed 3 times in Moscow, and I didn't trouble the scorers once.
Really?
To use the cricket terminology. Yeah.
So you
Moscow,
didn't make a clean
there was
lift.
something about that place. Didn't make a clean lift. There was something about Moscow. I don't know what it is. The city itself was fine. The people are fine, but something about Moscow that, that just didn't work for me. So it's the same thing. I went to Moscow, competed there, missed all my clean jerks, came back with a hip injury. I remember the event doctor, who was a Russian, trying to treat it while I was there. And I don't know what it was, but he had something which looked like a pistol, and you put in there something which I guess you would normally use as an injection, put it up against my hip and just pull the trigger, and something was shot inside my hip, like a painkiller or an anti-inflammatory, but it didn't quite do the trick. So as I said, when I came back from Moscow injured and having lost all that weight, that made a decision easy for me to compete at light heavyweight for Los Angeles.
How confident were you, Robert, going to LA, considering all the injuries you've had? And how were you mentally? I mean, you seem mentally strong that, okay, I've had all these injuries, but I'm determined to go to LA. It's part of my destiny here.
Yeah. Well, look, as part of that preparation, I approached my employers, as I said, who were the Age newspaper at the time. And I said, look, I've got to make the most of it. I've got to get over some of these injuries. I've got to train up to the level that I want. So I want some time off from work. And I remember my manager at the time said to me, well, you've used up all your holidays. And I said to him, well, I'll take next year's holidays. And he said, oh, you've used them up as well. So I said, look, I'll just take the time. I'll just take the time off without pay. And he said, well, what would you do if we don't give you the time off? I said to him, I'll leave. And he said, oh, would you really? And I said, oh, well, this is a once in a lifetime shot, and this is what I have to do. So I said, okay, leave it with me, and I'll speak to the board. So he spoke to the board of management and called me in the next day, and he said, look, we decided not to give you the time off without pay. We'll give you the time off, whatever you need, with pay.
Wow.
So it was a very generous offer. So I think I stopped work December 83, and I didn't go back to work except for a 3-week period until August of 84. So I had all that time off with pay, and for the one time in my life, I felt like a professional athlete. So I was training in the morning, resting, training again in the afternoon, which is what I needed to do, some double day training and so on. The only time I went back to work was at the trials for Los Angeles. I actually tore my hamstring. So I couldn't train twice, and I could hardly do any training. And my physiotherapist, who was the Olympic team physio, David Zucker, worked in the city.
Oh.
So I thought I might as well go back to work. I can't train anyway, and I'll get my treatment in the city. So I went back for those 3 odd weeks, and he started my treatment. And then once I was fit again to try and get back to do some training, I left work again and continued through to the games. And he kept on looking after me until we went to Los Angeles.
What were you doing as a job at the Age, if you don't mind me asking?
I worked in their advertising section, classified advertising. If you remember, that was the big earner for the Age newspaper in those days. And, I mean, we changed drastically now, where you don't have those big print. Everything is online and digital advertising and so on. But in those days, I think you needed to be a weightlifter to lift the Saturday Age with all the advertising that was in it.
Well, we used to get that newspaper. It used to take me 10 minutes to walk back up the driveway to give it to Dad. It was a huge newspaper, wasn't it? I remember that.
It was. It came in, I think, about 4 sections. So yeah. So that's where I worked. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Robert Kabbas is with us for Aussie Home Loans, Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures. Their areas of expertise include first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, personal loans, and they've got 25 lenders on their panel. So you've got fit again. You've missed out on the trials. You're obviously still confident you'd get an opportunity to go to LA.
Yeah, look, I tore my hamstring at the trials. I entered those trials in probably lifetime best shape, and I did enough, I guess, to convince the selectors that I would be selected, as long as I proved my fitness in time. So which I managed to do.
And then
So on the one hand,
keep
I
going.
was
Sorry.
annoyed that the hamstring had disrupted my training, but on the other hand, I felt that I was lucky enough to have been selected despite the injury, and it was just determined to make the best of my opportunity.
Were you confident? Did you feel you could lift as well as you lifted and perform at the level that you did to win a medal?
I think weightlifting is a sport of confidence. So you need to have a good talk to yourself, and it needs to become second nature. It's like I was asked in an interview, probably going back 10 years now. I was asked what what was the first thing that went through your mind when you missed a lift in a big competition or in any competition? Are you angry? Are you, what do you think? And I said to him, the one thing that I always went through my head when I missed the lift was surprise, because I never approached a weight thinking that I would not lift it. So if I didn't lift it, it was just complete surprise, because I was absolutely confident that whatever was on that bar, that I would lift. And it's something that you have to work at a little bit, and it has to be inbuilt. Some of it may be second nature as to who you are, but it's an absolute uh, necessity in weightlifting to have that supreme confidence. You have to feel superhuman, that you can run through a brick wall, that you're unbreakable. It's just part of the sport. And thinking that you can lift a weight will not mean that you will be able to lift it, but not thinking that you can lift it will guarantee that you won't lift it.
So going into the last weight, did you know you were in medal contention, or you knew that if you lifted this weight, you would win a medal?
I knew that with my first attempt in the clean and jerk, which had somehow become my better lift over the years, I knew that if I got my initial starting attempt in the clean and jerk, that I was almost guaranteed a bronze medal.
Right.
So we focused on that to set the right weight. Having said that, I had to start the competition at 185 kilograms first attempt, which would, as I said, almost guarantee that bronze medal. But I always had a history of being terrible backstage in the warm-up area. So I remember the bar was loaded to, I think it was 165 kilograms. So it's still 20 kilos less than I needed out there on the stage. And it was pretty bad. It was dreadful. It looked heavy and it felt heavy. And I remember one of my teammates, Tony Pignoni, who had broken the Australian record the night before in his weight category. And he was there for support. And when he still is a good friend of mine. And when I put the weight down, I turned to look at him, and his face had virtually turned as white as a sheet after he saw how bad that warm-up attempt was. And all he could say was, "Oh, yeah, that looked great, Rob." It just cracked me up, because I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't great. I knew it was really bad.
Yeah.
So that sort of broke the tension a little bit. My next warm-up was a bit better, 175, and then the 185, to be honest, was easy out on the platform. Something when you get out there on the platform, something, I guess, subconscious tells you this is where it really counts. The adrenaline starts running, everything kicks in, and if you're really, on song, the weight feels almost weightless. So 185 was easy, took some of the pressure off, and then after that, the other guys that were in contention for the bronze fell by the wayside. So all we could do was just look, well, can we go a little bit further up? I think the Japanese guy who won the bronze medal eventually was the favorite for the gold. He was the outright favorite for the gold medal, and the front row was all full of Japanese dignitaries and Olympic officials expecting that gold medal, which I think I don't think he was in the best shape entering the competition from what I saw in training of him. And also I think the the pressure was enormous on him to perform. And I must say that the weight selection wasn't great for him either, because I don't think they anticipated that we would do the lifts that we did, that I did. And I also took a larger than normal jump between my first and second attempt. So for my second attempt, I increased the weight by 7.5 kilograms, which is a new Australian record, which I don't think they anticipated. So they virtually wasted his first attempt on 190, because I could go past him with my 192.5. And then they didn't know what to do after that, whether to chase the Romanian who was in the lead, or whether to try and just get ahead of me. But then that means they would waste another attempt. And in the wash-up, they gave him a meaningless weight, which was not enough to put him in the lead, and far more than he needed to get ahead of me, which he missed. So then after that, for his third attempt, they just had to go for the gold medal. And he made a great attempt at it, I must say. It was a great attempt, but just too heavy for him on the day. So, yeah.
So do you think they panicked a bit? Because they looked like they were the favourites.
Sorry?
Do you think they panicked a bit, the Japanese? Because they looked like they were the favourites, as you say, or were the favourites, and
yeah,
he wasn't able to get the job done. It was slipping away.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe panicked is too strong a word. Maybe they just underestimated what we were capable of doing. So, because I mean, yeah, not too many people. When I used to compete overseas, I remember people would say, "Oh, are you from Austria?" They say, "No, Australia." So not a lot of people knew that much about us. You got to remember, in those days, there's no internet, there's no TikTok, YouTube. People weren't aware of what you were doing on the other side of the world. So I think we took a few people by surprise, and that particularly played out well for Dean Lucan, because the Americans had underestimated what he was capable of and didn't know what sort of weights he was handling in training and in competition in Australia. So, I don't think the Americans could have done any more, because Mario Martinez, who ended up with the silver medal in the super heavies, didn't miss a lift. So he got all his lifts, and it was his best ever performance. So I'm not sure he could have done much more, but if they knew what Dean was doing, he probably would have attempted maybe a little bit more. But I think his coach called all the right weights on the day, because there was no way they could have known, what Dean was doing.
So you've won the silver medal. No doubt it must have been a very proud moment. How'd you feel? We'll get back to Dean Lucan in just a second, because his event was after yours. So you could then just sit back and relax and get behind the big fella at the time. But no doubt winning a silver medal, you must have thought, gee, all my dreams have come true here. What a way to finish.
It was, I mean, to be honest, for a while, if I didn't have the photos and the videos from then, it would be hard to picture it again, because you sort of lose touch of where you are. All you remember is just bright lights and a bit of music and whatever else, and you're let out onto the stage. It's surreal in a way. But I mean, obviously, you as I said before, you go out there and you're not expecting to win a medal, but you're sort of optimistic and just a little bit stronger than hopeful. You're there, you want to perform. And I think part of it too is the fact that I had that preparation behind me, that 8 months of full-time training and so on. Otherwise, without that, it's like going into an exam knowing that you haven't studied. Whereas in this case, I went into the exam having studied as much and as hard as I could. And, you expect to get some reward for that, some performance. So I was just happy that, as I said, things fell in place for us. And I think it was just reward in the end. It's like, I've always said about luck in sport, there's no such thing as luck. It's when preparation meets with opportunity.
What did you say to your boss when you returned to work in August?
Oh,
Buy him a beer? I hope you did.
well, yeah. They were look, they were great. I went back to the age and they had a special, obviously welcome home, and all the people were there, and the board of management were there, and they actually they had just been uh, converting all their printing processes, whereas in the old days they used to print off metal plates, and they were no longer doing that. They had this new process and so on. So I was presented with what would be the last metal plate engraved of that was produced by the age, which was put together by having the different articles that appeared in the age and in the Sun and so on, all in a large frame and engraved in this silver metal frame, which I still have, and was quite happy and proud to receive. And no, as I said, they were great. There was no more that the age as an organization could have done for me, but also my workmates, because while I'm not there, someone had to cover for me, and sometimes when I used to have to leave early for a competition, again, they would make sure that all the work was covered. So I worked with a great group of people, and to be honest, you at the Olympic Games, the team of weightlifters were very close knit. Myself, Dean Lucan, Bill Stelios, who was in the lightweight category, and Tony Pignoni in the middleweight category. We'd all train together as often as we could, and yeah, we're very supportive of each other.
As you said, just getting to Dean Lucan, he kept it pretty quiet, and obviously the rest of the team kept it pretty quiet of how hard he was working and the weights he was lifting. Were you confident as a team that he could win that gold medal, Rob, when you went there to no doubt watch him and cheer him on?
Yeah, because he's one of those very rare people that is not only physically talented, obviously very strong, but also mentally very strong. Once he sets his mind on something, it's very hard to deter Dean Lucan. He's very, very rare to have all those qualities in the one man. And I would say that if you had to choose someone that had to lift a personal best to save your life, who would you choose? And two of the three people that I would choose were in that Olympic team. And one would be Dean Lucan, and the other one was Tony Pignoni, who was in the Olympic team. And the third one I would have actually picked would be Damon Kelly, because those three guys, when the weight had to be lifted, when it counted, they came through, I would say, if not every time, 99% of the time. So, and Dean was that sort of guy. So we were confident that I remember after the snatch at the halfway mark, and Dean was a fair way behind the American. He snatched 172, and the American had snatched 185. So that's a big, big lead. It's like being, up 7 goals at halftime.
Yeah.
And the English team coach, who I knew quite well, approached me, and he said, how much can your man do? What do you think he's going to do in the clean jerk? I said to him, he'll do whatever he needs to win. So, and that wasn't just big talking or whatever. I truly believed that whatever he needed to win, they were going to put on the bar and he would lift it, which he did.
And what was the party like? Was it a good party? He seems like a pretty
no party.
He's a gentle giant, isn't he?
Dean was sort of like quiet about the whole thing beforehand, and just as quiet afterwards. We just went back to, he had to go and have his drug test and so on, and I think he stopped off for a hamburger somewhere. Just came back to the rooms. Well done, mate. Thanks, guys. And from then on, we did a bit of sightseeing the next few days and whatever. We did commandeer some beers from the administration fridge, which we were told we could have. They said, "Oh, come in and have a beer with us." We took that to mean that we could take whatever was in the fridge. So, which we did and took back to the rooms and celebrated that way. But look, he's very low key. Actually, before the competition, we were confident. I think he was inwardly he was confident, but his theory was that, and he was right, every team that has ever gone away for weightlifting, always one lifter would not perform. They would have a bad day. It's just the law of averages. And he said to us the day before he lifted, well, there's 4 of us here. 3 have already lifted, and everyone has lifted well, either equaled or broken the Australian record, which just leaves me. So the law of averages is that I'm going to be the one that stuffs up. So as a joke, he didn't really mean it, but it's the sort of thing that would go through your mind as well. You know, that's the law of averages. Someone has to stuff up. But as it turned out, all 4 of us did well.
It just indicates too what sort of person he was, Rob, in that he actually said in the press conference afterwards, when talking to the media, which was not as common as it is today, that he was wishing all the Paralympians all the best. He said, I wish them all the best who are coming up next after the Olympic Games. It probably just indicates what sort of person Dean Lucan is.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, he's, we all know he's well-to-do outside of the sport and so on, but that was never an issue. Once in the team, he was just one of the guys, and I still keep in touch with Dean, and I'm hoping to catch up with him at the Australian Championships in Sydney in August this year, which will mark 40 years since Los Angeles. So we're hoping for a team reunion at the Australian Championships in Sydney. Yeah, he's just a great guy. I mean, from the first time I met him, I'd already been the Australian champion, and he was a junior, just a kid on the way up. And he just approached me to say hello and, congratulations and so on. And yeah, he's always been the same. He hasn't changed.
Robert Kabbas is our guest for Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures. With the Olympic Games not far away, Australia have 3 competitors at this year's Olympic Games. For Aussie home loans, who deal with anyone in Australia, they've got clients in every state and every capital, and they do what we're doing today, talking on Zoom. How do you see the sport at the moment? You, of course, were the president of the Australian Weightlifting Federation. You obviously love being involved in the sport. Do you think it's in a good space?
Look, it's the same as any other sport. It's like a clock. You'll go up and then down and up and down. I think at the moment it's regrouping. I think we had a really good spell, I guess, early 2000s, and then for whatever reason it had been a little bit of a struggle. Hopefully it's on the way up, and as I said before, the numbers are up. I mean, we were always looking if we can get 1,000 registered paying members in the Weightlifting Federation, we'd be doing well. And now we've got far, far more than that through a proliferation of different clubs. And again, through CrossFit and just the acceptance of weightlifting finally as a sport that's not going to stunt your growth, that it's not going to make you, muscle bound and all the nonsense that we've always battled historically. So I think it's getting there. Again, the future at the moment looks like to be with the women, but we've got some good male competitors on the way up. So I think it will do all right.
How do you rate?
We've got a medal chance.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So you think we've got a medal chance at these games to see if we can win our 5th medal?
Yeah. Eileen Chikamatana is a definite realistic medal prospect. She's a great competitor, and yeah, she'll be right in the mix there for one of the medals, that's for sure.
And as you said, it's almost 40 years to the day since you won that silver medal. Does it mean as much to you now as it did then, Robert?
It's not something that I sort of sit and think about on a daily or even on a yearly basis. It comes up every now and then, and someone will bring it up, or either through my son's school or someone who knows someone or whatever. It does come up, and I'd be lying if I wouldn't be human if I didn't say I still derive some sort of pride or pleasure from it. But it's not something that I dwell on on a regular basis. And I'm not sure even where it is at the moment. I think my partner, she's put it away somewhere for safekeeping. I'm sure it's safe where it is. So yeah, look, I guess part of it is you try not to be pigeonholed as, yeah, that's Robert Kabbas, the weightlifter. But I guess that's what it is, and you just we accept that, and but there's other things in life other than weightlifting and sport, obviously.
But it was such a big part of what you did, and it's been a great pleasure chatting to you today. One of only two Australian weightlifters, Damien Brown being the other. Robert Kabbas went to 3 Olympic Games representing Australia in weightlifting, 76, 1980, and won a silver medal in 1984. It's been a great pleasure chatting to you, Rob. Of course, we've been here, Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures, as we are every time we do this podcast, for Aussie Home Loans. Thanks to Windy and the crew for allowing us to be here, and their areas of expertise are purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans and personal loans. Enjoy the weightlifting at the Olympics. And again, Rob, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.